Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Pearson Business Book Club. My name is Eloise Cook and I'm the publisher for the professional business list at Pearson. Each month at the book club, we choose a Pearson business or personal development book and invite the author to discuss it. They'll also give a masterclass on a key concept from the book. And don't forget, if you need to leave halfway through, the video will be available to watch on demand at the book club website. So what are we discussing today? This month's book of the month is How to Get On With Anyone by Catherine Stothart. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Eloise. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here.
Great. Yeah, me too. I'm really excited by this session. I think fabulous title. We're going to learn a lot today.
I hope so.
If you haven't got a copy yet, you can buy it through the book club webpage. And we also want you to get involved. Catherine will be having some polls throughout the session, and you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. So yeah, we want to hear from you. So I will introduce Catherine. Catherine Stothart is a leadership coach and team consultant with 30 years experience in top multinational companies, currently Airbus and Google. Her best-selling first book, How to Get On With Anyone, is a guide to understanding others and communicating with confidence and charisma. It has sold over 11,500 copies and has been translated into 5 languages. You've also lived for 3 years in Cairo, Egypt. That sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. And 2 years in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, when your sons were young, and that sparked your interest in cultural differences and human behaviour. Mm-hmm. You live in Chester at the moment, and you play tennis, you enjoy cycling, live music, sports and theatre, and spend as much as time out of doors as possible. Well, I'm glad that now it's April and I'm moving into May.
Thank goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So welcome, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is very exciting. I will start with my usual questions. So okay. we ask every author these things. So can you tell us why did you want to write this book?
Yes. So getting on with other people for most of us is the most important part of our lives. You know, getting on with our friends, our family, our work colleagues is really important. But often we don't know how we're coming across. And often we get a bit puzzled by how people have reacted or responded to us. And I really wanted to fill that gap because we do all have this sort of core need to feel that we belong and that we're liked. So my book sort of aims to fill that gap really and give people that awareness of how you might be coming across, how to adapt that if you want to, and also the awareness of what other people need from you when you're interacting with them. And I think the other factor was that, you know, a lot of my background has been in big companies. And if you work in a big company, they might well pay for you to attend management training courses when you learn about this stuff. I wanted to make some of this knowledge and skills available to people for the price of a paperback. You know, if you don't work in a big organization and nobody's going to spend hundreds of pounds on you, then, you know, buy a paperback and you can work it out for yourself. So that was really one of the core motivations for writing this book.
Yes, and I say that to authors a lot, that the reader is kind of buying your training in a little package of for much cheaper. And
yeah.
You know, what would you say to them? You know, because you're not going to be there when they're reading it, they're sort of experiencing it differently. So that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And was there anything that surprised you about writing this book?
Oh, probably lots of things. I mean, one of the biggest things was how hard work it is. Writing a book takes an incredible amount of time and effort. So previously I'd written course materials for training programs. I'd written articles for magazines. I'd done a master's degree, so I'd done a dissertation. Writing a book is much harder than any of that. So that was one thing that surprised me. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is that when you're writing to explain something to somebody else, you get a better understanding of it yourself as well. Mm. So there's some insights I got while I was writing the book that I didn't really know before I started writing. So, for example, I often say to people now, getting on with other people is largely about managing your feelings about them and your feelings about yourself. Well, I think that's quite an important insight, really, but that's not something I knew before I wrote the book. That only emerged during writing. So that's, you know, that's a reason why it's good to write, actually, because you learn more, you get these insights.
Yeah. I guess, when you might be having trouble with people, you might sort of think, oh, it's them, but actually it's both of you. It's
yes.
us.
Yes, it's how you feel about them, but also how you feel about yourself.
That's very important. Yeah. And how do you want readers to feel about reading your book?
Well, I suppose I want them to feel positive. I want them, when they finish the book, I want them to feel positive. I want them to feel confident. I want them to feel that they know themselves a bit better, but also understand other people a bit better and appreciate other people better. Sometimes other people annoy us, but actually, usually most people don't set out to annoy us. And so, if you read the book and you learn some things that you can apply in your own relationships, in your family, friends, at work, and you feel happier and more confident about those relationships, then I think that's, I'll feel glad that you've read the book and that it's helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely what we want to achieve with all of our books, that you feel a bit more confident and knowledgeable about these things. Fantastic. Well, Catherine, so it's time for your masterclass, and I will let you get on with it. And yes, don't forget that there are interactive polls, and if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function. But very exciting.
Okay, right. Well, I'll just start sharing my screen, and I'm just going to make a small adjustment on my own screen, which is bit more helpful for me. There we go. That's it. Okay, well, welcome everybody, as we've already said. So what am I going to cover today? So I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence and the influence gap. I'm going to describe 4 typical styles of interaction that we tend to fall into when we communicate with other people. And in particular, the drives, what's driving our behavior when we're communicating, how this affects our decision-making styles, how we come across externally, and what stresses us when we're communicating with other people. And of course, how to flex your style so that you connect with others. So that's what I'm aiming to achieve today. And I want to start with a poll. So I'm going to ask you to do a poll with this question: how aware are you of what other people might be thinking and feeling when you communicate with them? So option 1 is, I often pick up cues from others about their thoughts and feelings. Option 2 is, I sometimes pick up cues from others about their thoughts and feelings. Option 3, I'm usually more focused on my own thoughts and feelings. And option 4 is, I've never thought about it. So I can see that the poll is launched and that people are completing it. So I'll just give it another few more seconds to give everyone a chance to work through. So that's probably enough time now. If Fama, you'd like to stop the poll and share the results. So I think that was 42% of people often pick up cues, 47% say they sometimes, 9% say they're usually more focused on their own thoughts and feelings, and about 3% say they've never thought about it. Wonderful. So let's see what we think as we go through this session. So thank you for doing that. Let's go on then to the influence gap. So when we communicate with other people, we usually have a positive intention. We don't set out to be awkward or difficult, but sometimes the way we come across can have a negative impact, and then we don't have the influence we want, and then we get this gap. So I'll give you a personal example of that. I live in Chester in the UK. My mother used to live in Cardiff, which is about 150 miles away. I used to call my mother regularly. My intention when I called her was to show her that I cared about her. But usually something would come up in the conversation, we'd have some sort of disagreement, and we'd both end the call feeling a bit dissatisfied. So I knew that I needed to change something about how I spoke to and approached my mother. Work example. So some years ago, I was working with Audi, heads of business of Audi car dealerships in the UK. And one of the heads of business I was coaching had a particular style of interaction, and he would he would speak to his managers, he'd ask them to do something, and he'd expect it to be done straight away. He'd go away, half an hour later, he'd come back and say, well, is it done yet? And of course, it wasn't done yet because they had their own priorities and lots of, 1,000,001 other things that they were doing. He found that frustrating, and they felt that they weren't trusted to get on with their work and that they didn't have the autonomy to manage their own time and their own activities. So in coaching, we worked out different ways that he could approach that. So he had a good intention, which was to get things done, but the way he came across had a negative impact on the people around him. So how do you close this gap? Well, closing this influence gap, I think, requires three things. Firstly, we need to know how our behaviour is experienced by other people. Secondly, we need to be able to recognise and manage the emotions driving our behaviour. And thirdly, we need to be able to pick up accurate cues from others about their thoughts and feelings. This is actually very difficult. So there was some research back in 2018 by Sun and Vizier, and they found that people don't actually know whether their behaviour is being perceived as considerate or rude. Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscientist, writes about how emotions are your brain's best guesses of what your bodily sensations mean. So she reckons we're not that good at managing our underlying emotions and being aware of them. And David Eagleman, another neuroscientist, his book, Your Brain and You, I would definitely recommend if you're interested in this field, talks about perception of others being prone to error. So although we think we can pick up people's thoughts and feelings, often we can't. It's a lot harder than we think. So, and this really, of course, is about emotional intelligence. And the interaction styles framework, which I'm going to talk about, helps you close this gap because it helps you be more aware of how your behavior might be coming across and might be being perceived, makes you more able to manage your own emotions, and it makes you more aware of what's driving other people's behavior so that you can see the positive intention behind their behavior, even when they might be annoying you, and so that you can better manage relationships with them. So that's a little bit of sort of why I thought it was important to write this book and talk about this. So let's get into a bit more detail. So what are interaction styles? So the definition I use is that it's patterns of physical and verbal behaviour displayed when interacting with others, linked to underlying inner drives, beliefs, aims, and talents. So in other words, it's your body language, your tone of voice, how fast or slowly you move, how fast or slowly you speak, linked to what's driving your behaviour when you're interacting with others. And so it's a really good tool for emotional intelligence because it makes you aware of how you're coming across. So I'm going to describe the 4 interaction styles. And as I go through these, I'd like you to think about which style you think fits you best, which one you perhaps tend to adopt most when you're interacting with others. So the first style is the mobilizer style. So when they have a task or a target to achieve or a job to be done, they want to go straight for it. Their inner drive is to get action with results. They believe it's worth the risk to go ahead and act or decide, even if they don't have all the information. And they have externally, they have very determined energy, a bit like the sort of energy you would have if you were in a hurry to get somewhere. And they experience stress when nothing seems to be being accomplished. So for example, if you're in a meeting and the discussion seems to be going round and round, or people are going back over old ground, people with the mobilizer style can get stressed, and then they become impatient and demanding, which obviously isn't ideal for making the team work well. What situations, I'd like you to put into chat, please, if you can, what situations might it be good to have the mobilizer style? So what situations would it be good to use that style? And by the way, we can all flex between these styles, and often we yes, so somebody's put disasters, absolutely. So when there's some disaster, some big problem going on, emergencies, absolutely. You don't want to waste time discussing, you want to get on. Coordinating volunteer activities, yes, being very clear about what you want from them, meeting deadlines. I'll just wait for a couple more things to go into chat. Yeah, another comment about deadlines there. Perhaps also when you've got a new employee who needs to be told what to do. Troubleshooting where you need clarity. So thanks to the people that put comments in chat there. That's really helpful. So this style is really good for certain situations. It's not so good, perhaps, when the situation is more complex, when there's lots of options to consider, or when you need to get people's buy-in, where people need to be committed and taken with you rather than told what to do. So that's the first style, the mobilizer style. So I'm going on now to the second style, which I call the navigator style. So for these people, when there's a task or a target to be achieved, they like to work out how to get there. So they don't rush ahead and act quickly like the mobilizer or make quick decisions. They like to make very thought through decisions. So their inner drive, their intention when they're communicating is to get a course of action, to get a plan. Their inner belief is that it's worth the effort it takes to think ahead and think things through. And externally, they have very focused energy. They can look calm, serious. They can look quite reserved. It's a bit like the sort of energy you would have if you were revising for an exam. And people with this natural style get stressed when they don't know what's going to happen. Maybe where there isn't a plan or where the plan changes before there's a new plan. And when they get stressed, they become tense and distant. And again, that makes it more difficult for people to interact successfully with them. So I'd like you to put into chat now, what situations do you think might be suitable for this style? Where would it be good to use this style? What sort of situations would you use this style? Preparing for an important presentation, great example. And I've probably been doing some of the navigator energy in the last couple of days while I've been preparing for this. Building new workflows when the decision is important or has a long-term impact. A building project, yeah, project management, absolutely. Excuse me. Planning an office move, that's a great example. Planning at the start of a project, strategy development, planning a trip. So that these things, of course, operate in our personal lives as well as our work lives as well. Great. Thank you for all of those suggestions to those of you who put those in. So, and another example I can think of is where you've got an employee who doesn't quite know how to get started on a task. So you might give them a bit of a plan to get started. So this style is really important, really, really valuable. It's not so good when you need rapid action or when people need to be enthused. So it's not necessarily a style that enthuses people. It's much more careful and controlled, much more thought through decisions. Oh, somebody's put in planning a party. Yeah, that would be a good one as well because of all the detail that you have to plan. Okay, so let me go on to the third style, the energizer style. So for energizers, when they have a task or a target to achieve, they like to get people involved. They like to get involvement from other people. They like to be involved themselves. So that's their inner drive. And they expend lots of energy and they believe it's worth the energy to get people involved. Their energy tends to be very engaging, a bit like the sort of energy you would have if you were hosting a party. And as I said earlier, we can do all of these styles, but we tend to have a default style that we slip into more often. But we can adopt all of these styles depending on the situation. So the energizer has very engaging energy. They're very expressive, persuasive, enthusiastic. They get stressed when they themselves or others don't want to be involved. And then when they get stressed, they can become unfocused, which is why I've got 3 targets on this slide. They can lose focus of the main task of what they're trying to achieve, and they can get a bit frantic and create a bit of a chaotic atmosphere. So what situations might it be good to have this style, the energizer style? at work or outside work. So if you could pop some ideas into chat, that would be really helpful. So when there are different parties equally involved or equally affected, yeah, and you want to get everybody's views and concerns involved, that's a good one. Another one I can think of is in call centres, for example, when you want to get that sense of the team being energised and enthused towards the goals. Yes, and somebody's put when teamwork is required to complete a task. Introducing a new initiative when you want to get people enthused about it. Oh, this is a good one. When the project is not fun to begin with and you need to inject a bit of fun. Organising group activities when you have the plan but now need to get buy-in. Great example of why you need all these styles, of course. Thank you for that one. When you're working on a project with multiple cost centres involved, for sales team, yeah, great examples there. So thank you for all of those. Where it's not so good is where you need a calm and considered approach, or when you need quieter people to speak up. Energizers can sometimes be a little bit overpowering, which makes it harder for other people who might have an important contribution to make to speak up. So not quite so good then. Right, that's great. Let's go on to the fourth style, the synthesizer style. Now, when they have a task or a target to achieve, it can look as though they're meandering around because they like to gather lots of input and involvement, and sometimes they can appear to go off at tangents. Their inner drive, their intention, if you like, is to get the best result possible. And their belief is that it's worth the time it takes to integrate all the different input. So they like to get people's opinions, they like to get information and sort of integrate it all. And that's what drives their behavior when they're interacting with others. Externally, they have very approachable energy usually, a bit like the sort of energy you would have if you were listening to somebody. And they tend to be quite patient, quite friendly, quite approachable, as I said. They get stressed when they don't have enough input or enough time to gather it all, when they're under time pressure, or enough credit for their efforts. And people with this natural style, they're sometimes known as behind the scenes, because they often do things behind the scenes and other people don't realise everything that they've done, and they often don't get the credit for it. And when they get stressed, they can become indecisive and unassertive. So what situations do you think the synthesizer might be a good style to use? Real estate agents, that's an interesting one. Okay, I don't think I know enough about that line of business to comment on that one. Trying to get honest opinions from customers, yes, so listening, being approachable, being unthreatening so that people will give you their honest opinions, that's a good one. Planning events, because you're trying to integrate everything. Again, planning a project, this style can be a good style when you're planning a project. Analysing data, yeah, absolutely, because it's getting all that information and analysing it. Implementing new processes and procedures. Ooh, wedding organisers, absolutely. Facilitating, yes, and actually facilitating and coaching. A lot of coaches, I am a coach, a professional coach. A lot of coaches have this style. Therapist, similarly. Mediators, yeah, wonderful examples there. Introducing a new system to be used for work. Finance and tech teams, yeah, gosh, all the suggestions are flooding in. Thank you for all of those. Yeah, so basically this style is good to use whenever there's a complex situation, when there's lots of nuances to take into account, and when you need all that information. It's not so good when somebody perhaps needs a clear instruction. It's not so good when there's not enough time to do all that integration, and it's not so good if you can't get heard, because if you do all this work but you can't get through to make people hear you, then it's not so helpful. So the point really is to not use the same style with all people in all situations, but to learn to flex to different styles depending on the situation. So I've given you a very quick run through of the 4 styles, and now I'm hoping that you might be able to assess which style you think you use most naturally, which style comes most naturally to you when you're interacting with others. And they're all good. they all have strengths and challenges. They all have pros and cons. And obviously I appreciate that you probably don't know enough about the styles to make an assessment, a full assessment at the moment. But interesting. So it looks, just give another few seconds for people who haven't made up their mind yet, and maybe you would like to end the poll there, Amma, and share the results. And I think we've got 18% of people on the mobilizer style, 48% on navigator, 3% on energizer, and 31% on synthesizer. Great. Okay. Thank you for doing that. Right. So having given you an overview of the 4 styles, what I want to do now is go into a little bit of the, so what? So quick recap of the 4 styles again. On each of the 4 styles here on this slide, the top 2 points are the inner drives or the intention when you communicate, and the third and fourth bullet points are the energy, how you tend to come across your external behavior. So I just want to make a couple of additional comments on this slide, things I haven't mentioned so far. The top 2 styles, navigator and synthesizer, tend to be people who are more introverted. And by introverted, I do not mean shy, nerdy, sits in the corner and can't communicate. All I mean by my use of the word introverted is your energy is more internally focused and you tend to think first before you speak. So the top 2 styles, navigator and synthesizer, tend to think first before they speak. The bottom 2 styles, mobilizer and energizer, their energy is more externally focused and they tend to think as they're speaking. And this basic difference between people can cause lots of problems, because often in meetings, the people who are more outgoing, the mobilizers and energizers, often have plenty to say. And the other people who like to think first can't actually think straight while the others are talking. So in a team, those differences are quite important to be aware of and to work out in your team, well, what can we do about this to make sure we hear everybody who's got something valuable to say. The other point I want to make on this slide is something else about communication that I haven't mentioned so far. On the left-hand side, the navigator and the mobilizer, they both tend to have a directing style of communication. What I mean by that is they're quite comfortable telling people what to do, giving instruction. The people on the right-hand side, synthesizers and energizers, are more comfortable giving information and explanation and not so comfortable telling people what to do. This can also lead to conflict because if you naturally have an informing style, you like to give information, you probably actually don't like being told what to do yourself. And if you have the directing style and are comfortable telling people what to do, you tend to find being given lots of information a bit confusing and a bit perhaps manipulative sometimes. You would actually prefer to be told what to do. So I'll just illustrate this with a very, very simple example. If you're in a meeting and you need the minutes to be done, if you naturally have a more directing style, you'll probably say to somebody, Eloise, can you please write the minutes of this meeting for me? And everybody knows exactly what I want. It's very clear. And even my tone of voice was very clear in that directing style. If I naturally have a more informing style, I'll probably say something like, it would be useful to have minutes of this meeting. Could somebody do them, please? Or Eloise, would you mind doing the minutes, please? Much more querying, questioning rather than decisive. So how you speak influences how people respond in this way. So that's something else to think about. Right, I'm going to say a little bit more about conflict. And conflict occurs between people of the different styles for a number of reasons. Firstly, we don't always appreciate the positive intention that the other person has. Their external behavior sort of irritates us or annoys us. And the other thing is we tend to have an emotional attachment to our own core needs. So our own beliefs about what's right. And when other people are behaving in a different way, we tend to feel threatened. And when we feel threatened, the more primitive part of our brain, the amygdala, takes over before the more rational prefrontal cortex can respond. That more primitive part. I think Steve Peters in his book calls that the inner chimp. So conflict can actually escalate quite quickly because of this emotional aspect. So on this slide, you can see two of the styles. I could have picked any combination of two styles, but in this case, I put mobilizer and synthesizer together. So the mobilizer, they're in a meeting, or this can be a meeting in work or a get together with friends or family outside work, of course. And their inner drive is to get a quick result and to go ahead quickly. And they have this determined, this sort of push energy. At the other side, the synthesizer wants to take time to gather all the input and consult people. So immediately the mobilizer feels a bit frustrated because the synthesizer seems to be taking too long. The synthesizer feels a bit threatened because they're feeling pushed when they don't want to be pushed, when they want to spend more time considering the situation. And they can get into conflict. When they get into conflict, the typical response, so I'll emphasize that this is typical, not always the case, but the typical response of a mobilizer is to fight and compete and to push harder. The typical response of a synthesizer is to sort of freeze and perhaps accommodate, give in to the other person, or appear to give in, and in fact, they'll go away and do something different. And so I think that knowing what's driving the other person and being able to respond more appropriately to it helps reduce the chance of conflict between people with the different styles, because you can appreciate where they're coming from and respond differently. So that's the mobilizer and synthesizer. Let's have a look at the other pair of styles, the energizer and the navigator. So the energizer, as we said, they have this drive to get involvement and lots of energy and enthusiasm coming across. The navigator, on the other hand, has a drive to get a course of action and take time and think things through. So the navigator can feel overwhelmed by the enthusiasm and the energy of the energizer, and the energizer can feel that the navigator is sort of stopping them and holding them back and not willing to progress or not showing enough enthusiasm. And again, because we always think our own way is right, we have this emotional attachment to what we believe is right, and emotions can escalate. And what happens with the energizer, when they feel stressed and they get into conflict, then they tend to go into flurry mode. And they may well compromise, but again, that might not necessarily be the best outcome for everybody. And for the navigator, they often tend to avoid conflict. So they go into the flight response and will avoid the conflict, which again, isn't terribly helpful because it means that things that maybe need to be discussed don't get discussed and don't get properly resolved. So that's just hopefully a bit of insight into how these different styles can conflict with each other. So what can you do about it to try and avoid some of these conflicts and try and get the best for everybody? So here are some tips depending on which style you think you are. So if you're a mobilizer, then slow down, listen to others, explore, allow them to explore the options, and control your impatience. You might even need to leave the room. You might need to go and grab a coffee while everyone else is discussing something. Mobilizers often betray their impatience by tapping their pen or fidgeting. So mobilizers can help themselves by, as I said, slowing down and controlling their impatience. What can navigators do? Well, navigators almost need to learn to speak up and perhaps plan ahead of time what they want to say, because they sometimes don't get the chance to get their view in. So do a bit of planning ahead of time when you know what the agenda for the meeting is, and speak up. The other thing navigators can do is show a bit more warmth. They do tend to be quite serious, quite reserved. I've worked with a number of navigators in my coaching work, and often they will go to a meeting, everyone's arriving at the meeting, some people are chatting with each other and building rapport. People with the navigator style tend to have their heads in their laptop doing some work and not interacting with the others, and so they miss out on that chance to build rapport and build connection with people. So those are some of the things you can do to help yourself if you're a navigator. Energizers, a bit like mobilizers, sometimes need to slow down and make an effort to listen to others, pause so others can get a word in, make sure you focus on the task, and perhaps say less. People with the energizer style tend to be the most talkative, and sometimes they just need to rein themselves in a bit and say a little bit less. And then the synthesizer, again, like the navigator, they need to make more effort to speak up and maybe be more expressive in their body language, maybe move around a bit more, you know, indicate. It's a bit like calling a waiter in a restaurant, indicate that you want to say something. And the other thing synthesizers can do to help themselves is to summarize their specific points. So rather than going into long explanations and giving people all the information, learn to summarize the specific points that you want to get across. So those are tips for people of each style. I've got another slide with what to do if you're working with people with these different styles. So if you're working with a mobilizer or living with a mobilizer, tell them what you're doing and get to the point quickly. So don't say things, if they come and ask you to do something, don't say, oh, I don't know when I can do that. I've got far too much to do. Say things like, oh, I can do that tomorrow, or I'll get that done by 5 o'clock tonight, or this is what I'm going to do. So if you're working with a mobilizer, they say, be bold, be brief, and be gone. Get straight to the point quickly and tell them what you're doing and when you're going to do it by. That's all they need. They're happy. They get frustrated when they don't know what's happening with whatever it is they want to achieve. The navigator, if you're working with a navigator, tell them what's going to happen. Perhaps let them work out a course of action. My husband is a navigator, and on a Friday night, we used to discuss what we would do at the weekend, and I would throw out lots of options and suggestions. He saw that as a list of all the things we had to do, rather than a set of options that we might choose from. So I learned to just stick to 1 or 2 options so that we could decide what to do, and it didn't sound like I was throwing out a whole load of stuff. So if you're working with a navigator, don't say, ooh, let's brainstorm some other options, or don't worry about it, it'll be fine. No, their drive is to work out all the risks, all the contingencies, have a proper plan, and that's what they need to feel not stressed. So say things to them like, well, let's agree a plan, or let's look at what the next steps are, or let's look at how we're doing against the plan. Those sort of things acknowledge that navigator's need for having a plan and having a course of action, make them feel happier, make them more able to contribute, and helps them avoid conflict. So if you're working with an energizer, involve them, listen to their ideas, show enthusiasm. So don't say things like, oh, I don't like that idea, or, oh, I don't want to be involved in that. You know, say things like, oh, that's a good idea, or I'd love to work with you on that. Or, you know, how about inviting some others? That really appeals to energizers. And finally, the synthesizer, when you're working with a synthesizer, ask them questions, listen to their input. There's nothing worse than asking somebody a question and then not listening while they're giving you their answer, and give them time to gather all the information and to sort of clarify their thoughts. So ask them what they think. Maybe if you're asking them to look at something, ask them how long they need, help them decide, and most of all, give them credit for their work. So I hope those are some practical tips there for working with the different styles, and also for your own style. I've noticed somebody's put a question in chat about, will there be a recording? And I believe there will be, but I'll let Eloise come back to that later on after I finish this part of the presentation. And what I'd like to do now, and I'm conscious I've thrown out a lot of stuff at you there. I hope some of it is well, I'm sure some of it will be useful to you. Let's do another poll. So what do you think now that you most need to focus on in order to connect with other personality types? So is it that building rapport with others? Is it being more aware of your own thoughts and feelings? Is it how well you listen to others? Or is it how well you pick up cues from others? I appreciate these aren't quite hard and fast categories, but it's interesting to see the responses coming in there. So quite a lot of people seem to be saying rapport. Fewer say being aware of their own thoughts and feelings. And then quite a few saying how well they pick up cues from others. So if we perhaps end the poll now, we can see, so 57% of people said how they build rapport with others. 9% said awareness of their own thoughts and feelings. 14% said how well they listen to others. And 21% said how well they pick up cues from others. Great. Thank you for contributing to that poll. So I've got just a couple more slides. So basically you saw this slide at the beginning. This is just to remind you of what I've been talking about, really, how when we communicate, we usually have a positive intention, we have a positive drive, but sometimes the way we come across, because we have our own stresses and so on, sometimes the way we come across can have a negative impact, and then we don't have the influence we want. And the interaction styles framework really helps you be aware of what drives your behavior and what beliefs underlie your behavior when you're communicating, but also how that works for other people, what drives their behavior. So you can pick up cues, respond more appropriately, and hopefully collaborate more effectively with other people, whether it's at work or at home. So interaction styles makes you more self-aware and able to manage your own emotions, and more aware of others, and being better able to manage the relationships with them. For further support, I have a resources hub on my website where there are lots of short explainer videos, there are articles, there's also some downloadable templates on the website. Obviously, you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. And on my website, I also have a newsletter. It's just a monthly newsletter where I send out some tips on communication and on motivation. So feel free to pick up on any of those options for some further support in this area. So thank you for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now and we'll go back to Eloise, I think.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Fantastic. That was really useful, very comprehensive. I thought that was fantastic.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say so. As you can probably gather, I enjoy talking about this topic because I do think it's such an important one for people to be more aware of.
Absolutely. And people are all the chat, all the things that people are saying. You can see that it is something that gets people sort of interested and engaged. It's fantastic. Right, so if you want to ask Catherine a question, please send it in the Q&A function. We've got about sort of 10 minutes for questions, so we're looking to hear from you. Oh, here's one. Catherine, would you say that these styles are developed from nurture, or are these innate, as in nature?
Right. That is a very big question, and psychologists still don't agree on how much of our behaviour is innate, nature, and how much is our upbringing, our nurture. I think my personal opinion is that our behaviour and our personalities are a combination of both. So I do think there are some elements that are inborn, particularly, for example, extroversion and introversion. But I also think that you can learn different behaviors. However, whatever personality you're sort of born with, you learn different behaviors from experience, from your upbringing, your education, your family, your culture. I think Eloise mentioned at the beginning that I lived for a few years in Egypt and a few years in Brazil, and there you see different behaviors as a result of the different culture. So we're a complex combination of factors, if you like, and whatever framework you use to think about personality, and interaction styles is one, any of them will only give you part of the picture, part of the jigsaw, because human beings are so complex. Our minds are so complex. No one framework or way of thinking about people will tell you everything. But the key is, the thing is to use the things that are helpful to you. So take out of interaction styles what's helpful, use some other models and so on. But basically, yeah, I think it's a combination of nature and nurture. And I think somebody, can't remember who, they talk these days about personality being both fixed and malleable.
Yeah. Here's another one. How do you advise dealing with narcissists and controlling people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, now if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably have a very important job coaching some famous ex-leaders of different countries around the world, but we won't go there. I think you have to just hold on to your own sense of your own identity and what you need. And you have to accept that you can't control other people. You can't make other people behave differently. But you can change your own behavior, and that sometimes leads to other people changing theirs. So by you behaving in a different way, by doing different things differently or saying different things, you can actually influence to some extent how other people behave and respond to you. But you can't change other people. And if you're working with somebody who does actually have a real personality defect, like narcissism, which is a personality defect, then you might have to move your job and go and work somewhere else, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely a good solution. One of the best presentations we've had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a way to know with more certainty who has what style? Is there a test they can apply to themselves and their colleagues?
Okay, the answer to this is yes and no. So there are lots of tests, and in fact in my book there's a quiz. I don't call it a test because it's not a psychometric test, but it is a quiz that helps you helps you assess which style you might fall into. And also in my book there are lots of case studies, and again you can see how other people have behaved in different circumstances and assess how you would behave, because however good a test is, it's one moment in time. If I do a test today, I might answer differently from how I do it tomorrow, depending on what's just happened to me, how I feel, and so on. So tests and quizzes can be useful, but only as one part of the picture. The other thing to say about interaction styles is that it does map to the MBTI. So if anyone has done the Myers-Briggs type indicator, you can map. The 16 personality types collapse down into 4 groups of 4, and you can map these 2 interaction styles. And there is a guide to that on my website in the templates section. There's actually a mapping of interaction styles to MBTI. So if you do know your Myers-Briggs type personality indicator type and you're sure that it's the right type, then you can see what interaction style you would probably fit into. But I would say that knowing yourself, understanding yourself to some extent is almost a lifelong journey. It's a continuous process. It's not something you do one day and then you've got the answer to everything. It is something that almost continues through your whole life.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And this was something I was wondering myself, actually. Is there a particular sort of percentage that people fall into of styles? And did you think that it was representative today or
yeah. Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Roughly, they tend to be, across the population as a whole, they're probably roughly equal. But, so I was surprised today because we only had 3% of people said they were energizers. And I did think, I wonder if I didn't describe it very well. Typically, they are more evenly spread. There is some evidence that they are a little bit gendered. And I'm a bit nervous about going here, but basically it does seem that there are more women with the energizer and synthesizer patterns that informing style of communication. And more men with the mobilizer and navigator patterns, and who have a more directing style of communication. Now, why that is, whether that's nature, nurture, you know, women behave in certain ways because of the social and cultural expectations. So I don't know why that is, but there is that. And I do mention this in the book, actually, that there is some gender differences in the different styles. And of course, in an organization, if you're in a business organization, so if I take Airbus as an example, I've been working with people at Airbus for the last 10 years. Certainly in the manufacturing parts of Airbus, there are probably more mobilizers and well, there's more men anyway, and secondly, there are more mobilizers and navigators. Why that is, I don't know. It probably shouldn't continue like that. It probably doesn't need to be like that. And as people become more aware of equality, diversity, and inclusion, you know, and more women are going into engineering, I think that would probably change. And I think if in another type of organization, for example, a charity, you've probably got more energizers and synthesizers, actually, not necessarily all female, I don't mean, but just people who are a little bit, shall I say, softer around the edges, if that's not quite a technical term, I don't think. So.
Yeah. Do you think cultural differences in communication styles is secondary to these 4 types you've just explained?
Do I think cultural differences are secondary? I probably do, yes. So I think there is quite a high element of nature in these styles, but how they come out can be different. So what I mean by that, if you compare somebody from Finland with somebody from Italy, Finnish people are known to be quite reserved. Italians are known to be quite expressive. So I think, how you see certain behaviors, but those behaviors might be from the culture rather than from the natural interaction style. Quite a complex area, and it's hard to answer that in like 20 seconds, but that would be my answer to that.
Yes, I'm sure there are likely to be many layers to that. You might have covered this previously, but what was the biggest challenge you faced when writing How to Get On With Anyone?
Oh, the biggest challenge I faced. Well, a lot of writers say they struggle to make the time to write. I didn't too much because I got into a pattern where I tended to write in the mornings. I managed my work, so I could, because I'm self-employed, obviously I can manage my work to a large extent. So I tended to work in the afternoon, do my paid work in the afternoons and write in the mornings because I think more clearly. And I would write only for 2 or 3 hours, and then I'd leave it and forget about it and get outside, get some exercise, get some fresh air, go and do my other work, and then come back to it the next morning. So I actually didn't find it too difficult to get into a pattern. I think probably you think that once you've sent the manuscript off that it's done, but it's not. Your publisher comes back to you and says, right, we've now typeset this. Now you have to proofread the whole thing. And they say to you, and you haven't put in all your references. You need to chase up all your references. So there's a lot that happens afterwards when you think you've done your bit. So I think that's probably a hard bit as well, and just the whole explaining what you mean so other people can understand it in a clear way. What I really enjoyed about writing the book was gathering the case studies. I mean, I had been gathering them over a number of years. I didn't just get them all in the last year or whatever. I'd gathered a number of case studies over a number of years that illustrated the different styles, and I actually enjoyed that. Also, all the case studies in the book are true, but all names have been changed, and I hope nobody recognizes themselves.
Yeah. And I think this will probably be our last question. Can the interaction styles be used as a team building exercise to help bond and build dynamics across a team of peers? Any suggestions appreciated?
Yeah, well, yes, it definitely can. I do run team building workshops based on interaction styles. You can actually do quite a lot in 2 or 3 hours. Unlike, say, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which I also do, but you need a day for that. So yes, you can do lots of good team building with interaction styles. I do run a masterclass about every 9 months on how to run interaction styles with teams. So if the person who asked that question, if you want to drop me an email, connect with me via my website, there's a contact form on my website. I can let you know when the next masterclass would be, if you're interested in attending that, to learn more about how to use this with teams. So yeah, and it's great because people, the nice thing about interaction styles is people get it quite quickly and can start applying some of the things straight away. And that's why I really like it. It's not too complicated to get your head around. As I said, though, it doesn't explain everything, but it helps. It helps you to understand your colleagues and yourself that little bit better.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. It's been absolutely fantastic. I know that you shared some information on how to keep in touch. I'm just resharing it because I know you mentioned there were some downloads, and if anyone wants to get in touch directly with Catherine to ask her more questions, I'm volunteering your services. We've also got a little poll running just to find out if you've enjoyed the event and if you've got any feedback for us. So please do fill that in. And in the meantime, there we go. So our next session will be on Tuesday, the 23rd of May at 2 p.m. UK time, when our book of the month will be Inside the Leaders Club by Michael Skopinka, who is an FT journalist. His masterclass will be on what does leadership look like after COVID? So very different topic, but hopefully equally interesting. So yeah, please fill in the survey, please join our mailing list, and we hope to see you next time. So thank you, everyone.